This is Lena Taylor, and she will be presenting on promoting student reflection through reflective writing tasks. I also want to let you know that this is being recorded, and it will be put on the ETE website YouTube channel. So if you're uncomfortable with that, feel free to step out.
Just put it here. Okay, sounds good. Okay, I'm just going to clip. Is it working? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming to this last session. I know you're all tired. I'm Elena Taylor, and I work at the Department of World Languages and Cultures, and today I'm going to talk about how to promote student reflection through for reflective writing tasks. So I just wanted to start my presentation by talking about my own experience, my personal experience with reflection. So I didn't grow up here, and when I came here, when I moved here, I was an adult, and of course I was familiar with reflection and what it is. Of course, all of us, we analyze, things that happen in life around us, and we think about our own experiences, what we say, what we do. We reflect on things around us. But yeah, I knew that, of course, but I never really thought about reflection as part of my college education, as part of my experience in college, and I didn't think about, reflecting on the content of the classes that I was taking, because that was never taught to us back in my home country. So when I moved here, it was somewhat new to me. And I started taking classes, and in my classes, and I was an English student first, and in my classes sometimes teachers were using those reflective tasks kind of to help us reflect on the content, on the material, on the lessons, and different parts of the lessons. And I really liked that because, first of all, it helped me to express myself in English, but it also helped me analyze my own experiences in my classes, helped me understand who I was as a learner. So I really enjoyed that. And in one of my classes, in my writing class, our teacher asked us to write metacognitive journals throughout the semester. And when he first introduced the concept of metacognition, thinking about thinking, I thought, oh, that's kind of complex, but it makes sense, and I like it, and I really enjoyed writing those journals because it gave me a chance to, think about why I was writing certain things and why I was using certain strategies while I was working on my draft. So I really enjoyed that. So in my own teaching, I also do implement reflective tasks. So I'm just going to go through all of these. I really like this quote at the beginning from John Dewey: "We do not learn from experience, but we learn from reflecting on experience." And of course, there is a lot of literature written on reflection and how it helps in education and in learning in general. So I'm just going to, highlight, some of the things that the literature talks about. So it helps students develop critical thinking skills and problem-solving strategies. It also helps them become better aware of connections between course material and their own lives. And also when they start reflecting on their own assignments, and it also helps them to kind of identify their strengths, their weaknesses, identifying their successes and setbacks in their performance. And it also helps them to set goals for improvement. So I work primarily with international students, with language learners, and I know that from my experience that they, reflection helps them better understand their own language development path and their own strategies that they're implementing. But I also know that sometimes it can be hard for students to engage in self-driven, independent reflection. So I try to incorporate those activities in class in order to help them reflect on the material. So I really like this quote here. It says, reflection best serves students when it is carefully structured. So it can be written reflections or direct discussions guided by another individual, teacher or mentor, and linked to clear learning objectives. So that's why I like to implement those structured reflective activities in my class. And I'm not going to talk about the benefits of writing when it comes to reflection, because obviously there's a lot of literature on that. And also, I have an article written in the journal of, what is it? Oh my goodness, excellence in teaching. I just forgot everything today. So if you're interested in learning more about reflection, then you can look at this article. It was published earlier this year. So in that article, I also give a lot of examples from student writing, so I did not include them in this presentation. And I also did not include some of the other activities that I have in my classes, just for the sake of the time. So I will talk about 4 different activities or tasks that I implement in my classes: writing to learn tasks, reflections on teacher and peer feedback, letters to the reviewer, and writing reflective journals. So once again, I'm not including the samples from student writing, their responses, just because it would be long. So if you're interested in that, there's an article in the journal earlier this year, so you can just take a look at those. So the first one is writing to learn tasks. I first experienced that in, once again, in my own classes when I was a student. I was taking an academic reading class as a student, as ESL student, and my teacher implemented those writing to learn activities throughout the semester, just to help us analyze, our own reading strategies and how we implemented them, and also think about the content of the reading materials that we were reading. And I really enjoyed them. So writing to learn tasks are short, informal writing tasks, and they help engage students in reflective thinking about concepts, ideas, and material of the class, and it helps them retain more effectively the information that they're learning in the class. And also it helps them raise their awareness of their own learning strategies. And from a teacher's perspective, it also helps you as a teacher to kind of see what they're learning in your classes and how effectively they're learning. And these writing to learn tasks can be implemented on different stages of the lesson. So I'm going to talk about this. So at the beginning of the lesson, if you implement those activities at the beginning of the lesson, they help students review the content of the previous lesson and reflect on what they learned in the previous lesson. So here's an example of such a task. Write a note to a student who missed the previous class. Explain how one idea from that class is particularly important to your life or your studies. So that's one example. And the other one I have here is, based on the assigned reading for today, what do you expect to learn in the lesson? So that's, I have some other examples of those activities that you can implement at the beginning, but I did not include them here. So in the middle of the lesson, those tasks encourage students to stay focused and promote their participation in the lesson. So one of the examples here, the teacher pauses the lecture or the explanation of the material at the key juncture and asks students to predict in writing what they believe will happen next. After completing a group activity, students are asked to reflect on the importance of this activity. So honestly, those activities that you implement in the middle of the class can be challenging sometimes because they kind of break the flow of the lesson, but you can still do that. And then at the end of the class, those writing to learn activities, they help students identify what they learned in the lesson, assess their understanding, and encourage to reflect on the lesson. And one example here is, imagine you have to go home and tell your parents about today's lesson. What would you tell them? And the other one I have here, finish the sentence. The most difficult concept or strategy or theory or topic, and sometimes I also ask them to write about the language learning strategy. For me today was something because. Explain how the teacher can help you with this difficulty. So you can see that they, those short prompts, they really help, help students to think about the class, to think about their learning, and reflect on it. So the second writing task that I will talk about is reflections on teacher and peer feedback. So it's a really good way for students to help students to analyze their performance, either it's writing or oral performance, and also analyze the feedback that they're receiving from their peers and from their teacher, and also make goals for improvement for the future. Yeah, so that's what I said. So how I implement them in my own classes. So I usually implement them in my classes when students give oral presentations. So in my courses, when students give oral presentations, the other people in the class, their classmates, they kind of give feedback on their presentations. So I give them those forms to complete, and they also have like an open-ended part where they can just write their feedback. So after everyone's presentation, students receive all the feedback from their classmates, and they also get the feedback from me. And after that, they look at the feedback, they analyze it, and then they write a short reflective piece, like a paragraph, what they learned from this feedback and how they can improve their performance for the future. And of course, it can be adapted to writing assignments as well. If you give students feedback on their writing, especially if you have like a multiple draft approach in your courses, then you give them feedback, and they can also reflect on that feedback and write that short reflection. So here's one example from my class. This is the prompt that students receive to write their note. Based on the feedback you received from the teacher and your classmates, write down your thoughts on how you can improve your presentations in the future. Provide specific examples referring to the feedback. For example, my classmates suggested I start my presentation with an interesting fact or question to catch the audience's attention, so in my future presentations, I will. Remember, this activity will help you analyze your performance, develop critical thinking, and track your growth. So from my experience, students really enjoy actually, looking through feedback and analyzing the feedback and writing those short reflections. Yeah. So the next one is the letter to the reviewer. So essentially, so in my classes, I teach, when I teach writing, I have a multiple draft approach. The students write 3 drafts. And for each draft, I ask them to compose a short note or a memo to me as their teacher, reviewer, the person who is reading their drafts, their writing. So it's kind of like a short reflective note where they identify strengths and weaknesses of their writing, and where also they kind of direct the teacher's attention to certain parts of the draft. And in those notes, they can also ask for specific feedback. For example, if they struggle with certain topics or certain concepts, they can also ask the teacher to help them or to give feedback on those things. So each letter, usually I ask students to write each letter with a certain focus. So yes, they identify strengths and weaknesses. In later drafts, they also analyze the feedback, and they tell me in their letters what they improved in their drafts based on the feedback that they received from me. But so every letter has a certain focus. I encourage them in the first letter, when they submit the first draft, to kind of focus on the bigger picture in their writing, things like content organization, topic development, and things like that. So like higher order concerns. And for the second draft, yes, they can also tell me what they improved in their draft based on the feedback that they received from me or from their peers as well, because we do peer review sessions as well. But I would also like them to focus on like lower order concerns, like, lexical issues, or, sentence structure, documentation of sources, if that's applicable, mechanics and things like that. And in their third letter, when they submit the final draft, I would like them to just summarize their paper and their writing process, and kind of think about the effectiveness of the paper, and also identify things that they would like to improve in the future based on the feedback. So yeah, I have a couple of examples here. So to kind of guide them through this process, because I do realize that for a lot of students that might be like a new concept, and because I teach mostly international students who are coming from different cultures, that can be a new concept for them as well, as it was for me. So I give them a list of questions to answer, or to guide them through the process of writing those letters. Maybe it's like 7 to 10 questions for each letter, and they don't have to respond to all of those questions, but those questions that just help them to compose their letters. And I just have examples of some of these questions. So in the first draft, they can think about these questions. Does the draft have sufficient support? Provide specific examples. What part of the draft is in most need of further work? In their second draft, what difficulties did you encounter while revising this draft? And the second question is, what makes this draft stronger than the first one? And in the final draft, briefly identify major revisions you've made while composing this draft. Are there any weaknesses of this draft you want your reader to be aware of? So I also give students at the beginning of the semester, when I introduce this concept of letters to the reviewer, so I give them those questions, but I also give them some examples from other students of effective and less effective letters, so they can see what model to follow. Because I implement this idea a lot, I gained a lot of experience, and I also talked to the students about their experience writing those letters. And generally speaking, they really enjoy writing those letters, because it helps them receive more specific feedback. Because sometimes, of course, when I read their papers, I give them a lot of feedback, or I think what feedback they need. But I sometimes may not know what they're struggling with. For example, maybe they're struggling with, like topic sentences, or maybe they're struggling with like the overall organization of the paper, or their like the flow of sentences in a paragraph. Sometimes I can tell by just reading their paper, but not always, right? So it really helps me to know what they think about their, writing abilities, their writing skills. And they also include that in the letter. For example, they can say, I was really struggling with like topic development, or in this paragraph, would you please help me and give me feedback on that particular paragraph? So when I read the paper, I know exactly what they're asking me for, so I give them feedback on that paragraph in more detail. So, and those letters, they help students approach the writing more analytically, and also, of course, they ask for more focused feedback. And it also helps them to know that they're engaged in the collaborative process, revision process. So it's not just me giving them feedback, but it's also them requesting feedback, analyzing that feedback, and telling me how they improve their writing based on the feedback I'm giving them. And also, those letters help students provide more specific feedback on their peers' drafts. Because when we do peer review sessions, of course, students read the letters first from their classmates, and then they read the drafts, and they also give them feedback, responding to those letters as well. And those letters also help them recognize connections between the classroom instruction and their own writing. Also with those letters, I didn't include that, but in my classes I do one-on-one conferences with my students. So those letters really help them to be more prepared for those conferences, because when sometimes, when they come to the conference, they kind of, wait for me to tell them everything that I want them to improve or I want them to do with their paper. But when they write those letters, they come to the conference kind of ready to talk about their paper. They have, some questions, some concerns. So it really helps them to be prepared for the conference as well. And of course, the conference is more effective that way for them, more beneficial. And then the last thing is writing reflective journals. So when it comes to writing, sometimes it's kind of hard to notice the development that we have as writers. So, of course, it may be hard for students to kind of notice that progress that they're making in their writing. So I do implement those reflective journals to help them notice the improvements that they have in their writing. So those are short reflections that students write on their drafts. And so here, I said that they help students notice improvements, and they help them reflect on the application of the material presented in the course to their own writing. So here's how I implement them. So once again, students write 3 drafts, and I give them a short prompt for each of the drafts, and they have to kind of write the response to those prompts. And I kind of, like the labeling system. So like, I do like 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3. So the first digit, the first one, stands for the number of the project in the course, and then the second one stands for the number of the draft. So 1, 1, it's the first project, the first draft. 2, 3, it's the second project, the final draft. Yeah. So I kind of label it that way. But it can be implemented in other courses. So if you're not doing the multi-draft approach in your classes, if you only ask students to just to write like the final paper and submit it to you, you can also implement that in the final draft as well. You can ask them to analyze, to reflect on their writing in that journal. And it can be adapted to other assignments or projects. So if it's not writing, if you do like a different, group project or group activity, or like something else in your classes, so you can also help them, ask them to reflect on that activity. And I do that in my other classes when I don't teach writing, for example. So here are some examples. So here are some examples of three prompts from the same paper, from the same assignment. So the first one is for the first draft. Think about the audience for your paper. What rhetorical features such as style, tone, language did you use to appeal to your audience? Are the overall content and organization appropriate for this audience? So a lot of my students, they kind of struggle with the concept of audience, so they don't really understand what it is. So we do talk about this in class also at the beginning of the semester. So I kind of base my first prompt based on that topic. So once again, it really helps them to connect what they learn in class with their own writing. The second example here, what is the most important information that you learned about integrating academic sources, and how was this knowledge applied in your second draft? So that's just, helps them to reflect on that. And the last one is how would this annotated bibliography be helpful to someone interested in this topic? What makes it effective? Provide specific examples. So that really helps them to kind of understand why their paper is effective. Yeah. So in conclusion, I think that writing is a really powerful tool when it comes to reflection. And those tasks, as you can see, they're so simple, so nothing groundbreaking here. But from my experience, they really help students to become better writers, better learners, because they really analyze their own learning. And it helps them also think more critically about the content of the course. Yeah, and because they're so versatile, or at least the way I see them, they can be adapted to, you know, like other courses, because I teach international students, but I know you're coming from, you know, all different backgrounds and experiences, so you can implement them and adapt them to your classes. Or they can give you ideas and inspire you to create your own writing tasks. And that's it. So that's the information about that article. So yeah, if you want to learn more about this topic, you can just read the article, or you can email me. Thank you. So I guess you have time for questions or comments, or maybe experiences that you have in your classes with reflection.
Don't forget to repeat the question. So I used metacognition for several semesters, and because my background's education, but I'm applied science, technology, and education. And the students hate it with a passion of 1,000 passions, but then once they get used to it, they understand why they're doing it, and they're thankful that they can go back and look at the metacognition. So
Yeah.
it's not as it's somewhat structured. So they do a research proposal, and that metacognition is built into the handouts that I have them do, and it's fascinating. So like you said with the metacognition, I was like, yeah, that's what we do. But the prompts might also be really helpful for technical writing classes.
Great. So one of the participants said that she's implementing metacognition in her courses, and at the beginning students don't really enjoy doing those activities, but at the end they kind of, you know, come to like a better understanding why they're doing it, and they're doing it much better. Yeah. And also in my classes, I also noticed that at the beginning they might not know how to write those reflections, because, you know, like I said, for some of them it can be a totally new concept, like why am I supposed to reflect on how I'm learning, right? So but then they kind of, you know, get a hang of it, and they really, you know, become really reflective learners and students. Any other comments or questions? Okay. All right. Thank you.